I think we're
Yes.
live. Hello, good. So we are live. Have the
I
fabulous
should turn this
Eva
down.
here.
Hang on, I got to turn it down. Down.
Ah,
Yep, good.
get the volume up on your phone. I see.
Yeah.
I see. That's all good. Okay, so little Sunday afternoon chat. I think I'm gonna record it as well for a podcast.
Yeah.
Which I actually have to start putting them live on a podcast network sometimes. I just have to work out the technology of podcasts because I am old and do not adapt to change.
Yeah. Oh, it's tricky. I can't figure out this live chat. It's not coming up. Oh, hang on.
Is
There,
it?
right. Cool.
Oh, well,
It is
someone has.
now.
Yeah, it is.
No
All
one's
right.
saying anything, but I got the screen.
Also, don't get too distracted by. I'm particularly thinking from the point of view of recording for a podcast.
Yeah.
Pausing to look at stuff in a chat that people listening to it can't hear.
Yeah.
Might not make a lot of sense. Not saying anyone who's watching us live isn't important. You're all special and wonderful, and we love yous all, as
Yay.
Jeff Fenn say. So happens when you get punched in the head too often, yeah.
Oh, just look at my fringe. It's just gone because I've got my hair up today. I normally have it down in these, but I've been at work all day and I only just got home. So.
That's okay. We're all good. So, yes, if you are watching us live, I always throw this in that we're not necessarily going to respond directly to chat, although I might if someone puts something very pertinent, because we're recording this for a podcast and that won't necessarily make sense to anyone listening to it later. If I can find a way to put a comment in, or if Eva sees a comment and finds a way to bring it in organically, we'll do that. Otherwise, please don't feel slighted if you're watching it live. That's all. Okay, so I'm going to do the little pause and then do an intro for the podcast. Are we ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I have with me today the amazing, fantastic Eva. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing well. Chatting through the magic of the Australian internet. And magic, you have to imagine scare quotes around that because it's on a wish and a prayer that we don't get any dropouts or interference.
Yes.
So apologies if sometimes our chat gets a little disjointed. The wonderful 70th or 80th in the world internet speeds that we have in Australia mean that occasionally one or both of us will get dropouts and won't hear the other. But
and I'm using an incredibly old laptop as well, hence I'm all twisted around again like last time. Hence the looking like a call center person. But it does make the sound quality a lot better when we use the mic. So I'm gonna.
So we're good, look at us complaining though. In recent history, this would have seemed like magic or something.
Yeah, I know. We're very
sci-fi shows. It was like
we take a lot of things for granted and very privileged.
Video telephones were a far-flung future thing, and we have them. But it's all good. So, Eva, being multi-talented, multi-skilled, but also a regular writer, and I thought we could start this conversation on a very interesting topic you've been writing on, and that is namely the history of porn, if I'm right.
Yes. Took on, like I write for adultmatchmaker.com, which is one of Australia's largest, if not the largest, online dating websites, one of the oldest as well. It's been around for many years, like when internet dating wasn't actually cool. We've been around since then when it was creepy and weird, and now everybody's doing it. But I'm their regular sort of resident expert, and I do a lot of articles for them. And we come up with a lot of topics and ideas, and we're doing a series at the moment. It's just a history of stuff. And so we did the history of masturbation, which was a really fun one to do. And I'll be doing one on the history of sex toys and condoms and all sorts. And we thought we'd do one on the history of porn. And look, it's a great piece. I'm really proud of it. But oh my gosh, what are we, 150,000 years of human human life on this planet, and we've been getting off to images since about then. So it's a long time to sort of try and break down into history, but I managed to do it fairly well, I think. I'm quite proud of it.
Yeah, this is not just an excuse to have a plausible deniability for your browser history, is it? Like when someone goes, "Oh my God, how
look,
much
I've
porn do you look
been a
at?"
sex writer for 20 years. My browser history is, questionable at times, There are sometimes, and because I'm also a writer that writes a lot of stuff for myself, and I'm quite interested in grisly, dark, serial murdery type supernatural things. My browser is the browser history is I'm sure ASIO has a file.
Yes, you're in the file of either a writer or a serial killer. We're not sure yet.
I was talking the other day, I was in a police station for something completely unrelated, but I was in there and they were talking about my hair and how bright and beautiful and whatever it was. And I said, I think, because my hair falls out fairly easily because I've been dyeing it and bleaching it for years. And I also pick at it sometimes and just sort of pick little bits out. And I wouldn't be surprised if my DNA and my hair, these little blue hairs, are found in millions of crime scenes across the country. It's like, it's one of those blue hairs again.
Just
so, yeah.
Eva leaving a trail everywhere that'll incriminate you at a later date.
Sparkles and sunshine and blue hair.
Where you're talking about, the prehistory of stimulating images. I always think of, when doing art in school, they show you these old sculptures that they call them Venus sculptures. A famous one called the Venus of Willendorf, very generously proportioned, feminine statue of varying sizes, and you got all these people trying to be scholarly and say, "Oh, the large breasts and hips suggests this may be a totem from a fertility religion." I go, yeah, unless they just like big old titties.
Well, look, I found in the research of this piece, there were quite a lot of kind of there are differences between fertility icons and ones that are made to kind of simulate or emulate or depict sex and sexual acts, and there are differences, but a lot of the time, similarly to things like, if we're going forward in history to things like, say, the Sistine Chapel and a lot of religious art, which is just it's a really good excuse. Porn and sex and all those things were frowned upon, but you do it in the name of God, and suddenly it's okay. It's like that great meme that goes around with Michelangelo, who's very, very gay, saying, sure, I'll paint the chapel. I'm going to paint a bunch of guys with their dick outs, though. And that's basically what a lot of that sort of old iconography stuff in Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church and all that is definitely a kind of, it's a little bit of a nudge to to all the other sexy gay men in the area, and also a bit of a fuck you to the church. And it's funny that it's still and it's looked at as so these things on Facebook, you can put up a picture of the Venus in her seashell and that's fine, but you do the same thing as a model and you're banned. So it's it's interesting what is erotic art, what is porn, what is a basic just depiction of a naked form. And it was a really fascinating few weeks I took off to research that piece, because there is so much out there, and so many questions about what it is art, what is porn, what is fertility and ritualistic, and what is just to get people's jollies off.
Yeah, I was interested in your research. Did you find periods in history or cultures in history that were particularly accepting of?
Oh, yeah. No, almost all cultures and periods before Christianity took over, really. So especially the ancient kind of Middle East and the Eastern religions. And a lot of people think of the Middle East as being fairly repressive and oppressive. But things like books like the Kama Sutra, the Perfumed Garden, and things like that all came out of those cultures, and they are very explicit manuals for sex and sexual pleasure, often for heterosexual couples or married couples, or in that sort of linear or that sort of rigid format, but very much about both male and female pleasure. And the two main ones are, like I said, the Kama Sutra, which is an Indian text which is dated to around the fifth, 5 AD or 5 BC or one of them. And then the Perfumed Garden, which is from, I think, that's sort of what we now know as maybe Tunisia or that sort of area. So very deeply religious, but also very connected to sexual spirituality, which is, and then the Christians came and took over, and sex became quite taboo. But the Romans, before they became Roman Catholics and Christianity kind of took over that area, they were all fucking everywhere. There were depictions of sex and sexual acts and erotic art and erotic poetry, and there were brothels and there were sex clubs, and there was all this sort of stuff, and it was always very much decorated with these beautiful artworks. And so, there are many cultures sort of before 2,000 or 3,000 years ago that were very much sexually mature and sexually aware of pleasure and both the procreation side of sex, but the pleasurable and companion and connectivity side of sex as well was very much celebrated.
Yeah, there's an interesting, again, old Celtic culture, lesser known to a lot of people's sculptures from Ireland called Sheila na gig. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Of who? Sorry, I was going to get distracted by the stupid, by the live chat and turn it around.
It's an ancient Irish Celtic sculpture called a Sheila na gig.
Oh yes, yeah. I didn't go into that in the piece, but yeah.
They're fascinating because the ones that they taught us at school were the Venus of Willendorf and similar ones, which has been raised. Look, for all we know, those were just self-portraits by pregnant women, just going, "This is me," and I'm, it could have been symbolic to be.
Even pregnant women. I mean, if you look at a lot of those sculptures, and people sort of would look at them and go, "I can't quite see how this is actually a female form. It's just breasts and a belly and feet." But if you're a woman with breasts and a belly, because most of us, have, especially after you've had kids, even if you're not pregnant or whatever, we've all got internal organs, we've all got bellies. If you take that view looking down, that's what you see. So there's no mirrors. There might be reflections in a pool or in a whatever, but if you look down, you see large pendulous breasts, you see the belly and the thighs and all that. So a lot of those sort of statues, and they were looked on as fertility in a sense. And I saw one of the comments saying they were self-portraits of pregnant women, and they were looked on as that. But it was like that was how you saw yourself, because we didn't have those full-length mirrors and we see ourselves in these sort of upright, straight-on, full frontal kind of ways. Yeah. We look at ourselves sort of, the perception what we look like from our own eyes is that view. And so that's more likely in the research that's sort of since come about is definitely more likely a self-portrait. And it might have been celebrating the fertility and a lot of the times the bellies are quite round and the breasts are quite full, which depicts probably pregnancy. But it's how you viewed yourself, how you would have looked down and seen your body.
Yeah, and the Sheila na gigs are quite different in as much as the general pose of them looks like the female being represented is preparing for a gynecological exam, basically. Opening everything up. And a lot of people had always said, like, "Ooh, that's definitely fertility. That's like, come and get it, big boy." But that's not the only way to interpret that either. That's also possibly a representation of childbirth. That's
the thing that comes to my mind in the image is, in the Monty Python's Meaning of Life and the Universe song, which is like one of my favorite songs ever, and you get that computer animated bit of the stars all coming together and becoming a woman, and then the belly grows and then she leans back, she opens up her legs and the universe is born from her. And I see it that sort of, I think it's a lot of a representation of this, I guess, the life force that comes from a woman. I have big issues with talking about spirituality and wombs and all that, because I think I think it's very, very cis focused, and not all women have vaginas and uteruses and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of women, including myself, have had very, very difficult reproductive. There is nothing spiritual about my vagina or my uterus. There is nothing. I think since I've had my uterus removed, there is a lot more woohoo going on inside me, but it was a rotten and diseased, horrible thing, and it was not particularly spiritual. And it used to really bother me that people would sort of, especially when I was talking about my own sort of issues with my body. Oh, but it's beautiful, and it's the life-making spirituality of the universe. I'm like, no, it's just an organ that bleeds and hurts and is trying to kill me. I'd prefer not to have it in me. So I get that there is something kind of beautiful about creating life, and I think there is something quite spiritual about it to a degree, but I don't believe it is just the realm of women, and I don't believe it is just the realm of uteruses. And so it kind of bugs me, but I also, in an ancient sense, with the idea of, magic and science and religion and all that coming together to explain life, because we, live under the stars and don't have computer and Google back in the however many centuries ago. I get that those sort of things would definitely have been talked about and believed in. But then you look at other cultures that have, recognized trans and non-binary and that sort of, like your Native American two-spirits and multi-spirits and that sort of stuff. And they were still very spiritually minded and all that. So, it's a fine line for me with the whole, I just think it's the language has been adopted and co-opted by swerfs and turfs, and this idea of female sacred sexuality is quite cringeworthy to me, in a modern sense. But in an ancient sense, I do understand it.
Yeah, well, it was certainly a mystery for people for a long time. I mean, one of the theories I read is that humans, particularly human males, had an idea about how reproduction was linked to sex until they started farming, until they started to keep animals domestically. And they went, hang on, wait, the male does that, and then a baby comes. Oh, wait, when I did it with and then a baby. Oh, my God, I made the baby. I thought the women had this mystical power, but, I'm actually part of the process.
Yeah, and then the power comes in, I did this, and oppression and all that stuff. But yeah, no, it's very interesting. Fertility rituals and the idea of, I guess, spiritual fertility is it's fascinating, especially looking at ancient cultures where they, that's their science, and it's quite interesting. And the women were very much involved and understood the properties of bodies and the properties of certain medicines and herbs and all this. And then this is where you start getting into the idea of witches and witchcraft and women being evil sorcerers because they can, take the pain away from period by using a herb, and they can take the, comfort of make childbirth easier and things like that, and because men in charge and they don't understand it, and they look at it as this power of something that's unknown, and we don't know, and it's weird, it's witchcraft, and we're going to burn you or drown you, and so the women have for centuries understood a lot more gynecologically than a lot of male gynecologists understand today, I'd say. But not to be, I think there are some wonderful male gynecologists out there. But yeah, I think the women's art of medicine and that sort of body knowledge was lost for a long time, or hidden and underground for a long time because of fear of persecution and being accused of being a witch and being burnt or murdered.
Yeah, well, the same. Oh, then my voice went squeaky. My teenage years coming back there for a moment.
That's puberty.
Puberty, several decades late. The same writer who raised this theory of it was when humans got into animal husbandry that the males may have first started to connect the sex act with reproduction.
Yeah.
They also basically said that's probably the patriarchy as well. We have all these examples of matriarchal societies, and patriarchal societies seem to coincide with farming culture, basically. Again, and I think I acknowledge they were drawing a bit of a long bow because there was no conclusive evidence one way or the other. But what's interesting to note, prior to agriculture and animal husbandry, many more matriarchal societies. Post domestication of animals, way more patriarchal societies. And it's reasonable.
Because, you know, women are basically just farm animals, you know. We are to be impregnated and caged and, you know, put into a life of servitude and serving men, didn't you know? Come on.
Well,
You've been on the internet long enough.
Yeah, I mean, as we saw, I'm talking about primitive societies like the New South Wales legislature, when there's debate about whether abortion should be decriminalised. Horrible.
I can't believe that the face of pro-life at the moment is Barnaby Joyce. I cannot even, like, for anyone who's watching who's not an Australian, Barnaby Joyce he's a misogynistic, religious minister who was caught having an affair with a staffer who he got pregnant, who is now living with, and he's had another child with. He left his wife and his 5 daughters to because of the scandal broke and all this sort of stuff. And he's now, you know, standing up there, the front face of the anti-abortion campaign. And I just think, A, you have no uterus. What? B, you have no way that you can be preaching morals and family values when you cheated on your wife, left your kids, and went and started a family with a young woman who was an employee of yours that you were in charge of. And it's a weird kind of power thing. Like, and yet they're lapping it up. Oh, Barnaby's on our side. Yeah, good.
Oh,
show,
yeah,
mate.
It's worth pointing out, prior to being anti-abortion, he very aggressively campaigned against marriage equality.
Oh, yes, on the family values ticket as well, yeah.
And that was the exact time he was fucking his staffer. He was pushing his family out in front of the cameras saying, well, it's only straight people are allowed to get married because that will ruin my family and the sanctity of my family. At the actual time, he was fucking his staffer. Like, he has no moral code whatsoever. He's such a hypocrite. I don't know how they embrace him. Like, why didn't they just push him aside? Go, oh, dude, fuck off. No, not you. I
don't quite know. I guess it's a celebrity is a celebrity, regardless of what you're famous for. Honestly, I don't quite know. I mean, surely why not get someone hideous, just as hideous, but at least with a uterus, with like Miranda Devine or someone, you know? Like, you know, I mean, it's weird that they put these men forward to make the point of taking away rights of women. I'm like, at least get someone with the right bits, like the uterus, that's the actual question and the actual, you know, this is what we're, you know, fighting for, the rights to have the autonomy of what goes into or out of our uterus. At least have someone who has that body organ making those, you know, comment. I mean, I still wouldn't listen, and I'd still think she's a fucking idiot. But at least you could say, well, you know, she can make that choice for herself. He's got no right or no way of making that choice ever. Like, it's a very odd. And the best thing about it, though, is that one of his daughters, I think it's his youngest daughter, who has stood up and basically said, I do not support you yet again. You know, she didn't support him in his election rebid. She didn't support him when he left her and her mother and sisters and went off with Vicky. And he didn't, you know. And she's just like, she's quite vocal. I think she'd be a great campaigner for for abortion rights and reproductive rights. I think we should get today starts with an Odette or something like that. She's got an interesting name. I think she'd be great. Let's get her on.
Yeah, I think it sounds like she's just about to do it. Like, she's super pissed off at her dad. I mean, again, taking it one step further, it's not just that he's a man and that's inherently obnoxious, and why don't you get an anti-abortion woman to front your campaign? But he's a guy who's got no moral standing, is a complete hypocrite, is utterly untrustworthy. Who wants to be associated with someone like that?
I don't know, but it's, you know, it's similar to, you know, Lyle Shelton and his bullshit. He's another Australian right-wing Christian nutjob who got 13 votes or something and didn't make it into Parliament, and is just, you know, he just throws his bullshit out into the wind all the time. And I don't understand why people really do back and support, considering, like, I've never seen a positive comment. Like, Lyle Shelton's all over Twitter. I've never seen anyone go, yeah, Lyle, I agree with you. Every single comment is pretty much #EatShitLyle, which is one of my favourite hashtags to use.
I was about to bring that up. That's like the only thing I like about Lyle Shelton.
Yeah,
is he has his own hashtag. #EatShitLyle. people use it all the, like because he keeps failing. He keeps saying dumb shit.
Yeah.
He keeps advocating for things that get defeated, and
he's
so
absolutely obsessed with genitals. Like, it is insane. You follow his Twitter feed. If he's not going on about how everything's ruined because we got marriage equality, he's going on about children's genitals, and it's quite disturbing. It's like, I don't know anyone who works in trans health or who is trans or who has a trans kid who is that obsessed with genitals as Lyle Shelton. He's got a fixation on them, and it's creepy and it's weird and it's disturbing, and it's like, mate, go and just play with your own genitals for a while and relax. Like, it will make you feel so much better, and you might stop focusing on everybody else's pants. It really should not matter what's in them. Like, take care of your own business, mate. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. And, you know, going back to our whole original topic of history of porn, people like Lyle Shelton have been around for thousands and thousands of years, and they get listened to because scared, fear, want to be liked by him. I don't quite know what it is, especially in these days. I don't know what it is. Back then, I think that fear of God probably had a lot to do with it. But these days, I don't quite get how someone like him still has a platform. Hi. You've got all quiet.
I was slightly distracted with thinking, when you say that stuff about his obsessions, which is absolutely real, I was going to throw back to what we were saying before. Speaking of people who,
little pimp shoes. Don't you like trans kids? Poor thing. You don't have to be one.
Them. They're gone.
Yeah, I'm just like, I just feel like, trans is. It's like, mate, are you trans? No, then why do you care? Like, honestly, let live and let live. Anyway, I shouldn't have looked at the messages.
People who want to control other people's lives. Joking about your browser history, I think the police should be all over Lyle Shelton's browser history, quite honestly.
Oh my God. It would be
mind boggle.
It would be amazing. I'd love to be a fly on that wall. I know that someone sent him a copy of my book. Whether or not he ever received it, I don't know. But I've always wondered about that, if he ever opened up, because it was just sent when he was head of the Australian Christian Lobby. Someone sent it to them, because you can send anything to them and it's free. They have to pay for the postage. So I know somebody sent it to them. Whether or not he opened it, got it, I don't know.
Yeah, well, because of course the other thing that he's obsessively against is the Safe Schools program. Some basic sex education, basic anti-bullying thing, like don't bully gay kids, don't bully bi kids, don't bully trans kids.
And it's not even sex education at all. It's incorporated in sex education because it is sort of based for LGBTQI kids, but it's an anti-bullying program. And the thing is, it's mainly a program for teachers. It's not often anything that's going to be brought into, this is the problem that Lyle and all those anti-safe school people have, is they go, they're going to start teaching, gender bullshit in classrooms. And really, what the main thing for safe schools is that teachers have a resource that if they notice that there's a kid in their class that's struggling with their sexuality or their gender, or they have an inkling that they might be, or the kids come up to the teacher and said, I'm gay, I think I'm trans, I'm bi, I'm whatever, that this teacher has a list of resources that they can then use to help this kid, and that they can instill programs in the classroom that help other kids to understand or accept or and just realize that it's it's an anti-bullying thing focused on young gay, lesbian, trans kids. And there is nothing there. The fear that he has raised in people, him and that what was the political posting mama or whatever her name was, a liberal.
And
there
was that woman who was fronting it for a while,
trans kids, and it's really it's so disturbing to me that they want to actively stop a program that is designed to save lives. I mean, that is literally what it does. Will stop the thousands of young youth suicides that we have around children, especially ones at the moment in the trans situation, because there is no resources and there is no help and there is so much anger and hate. You have like was it the Australian newspapers just set up a whole section that's basically going to be anti-trans and talking to, doctors that have never worked with trans kids about how bad it is for trans kids to get any kind of treatment and all this sort of stuff. And I just think you want these kids to die. That's the only way, and the only reason I can think that you would be wanting to stop a program like this is you actively want these children to hate themselves and to remove themselves from the world, because there's, and that makes me so sad and so angry. And, my daughter's got trans friends, and, they're all a little kind of queer bunch of kids that she hangs out with. And it just breaks my heart that this is something that these kids will be seeing on the news and in the newspapers and the radio, that your life is not worth protecting, and your comfort levels in classrooms and your acceptance level in schools is not our problem. And I find that revolting, and I find it obscene, far more obscene than teaching kids that trans kids exist.
Yeah, I mean, it made me very angry because my lad was at school when Safe Schools came out. He's a high schooler, and he was actually sharing some of the stuff with me, and he's saying this is being very positive at school. And in fact, then his school had a very high-profile trans student was on Australian Story, and actually she's on Neighbours now. She's the
is that her? She's so good.
Yeah,
I even thought about watching Neighbours again because she's on it, because I've seen a few clips. Yeah, right. I know who you mean.
Yeah, she actually went to my lad's school, and he was saying, like, opening the conversation, and people are talking about it, and just hearing the positive stories from someone going through it, and then these fuckwits just with their hyper negativity and aggression. Like, there's one section of it where there's a thing that tries to teach.
Oh, you've cut out on me. You've gone all paused. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that.
Okay, I'm back. That's all right.
Okay. There you are.
That was really weird. There was just delay, and I went black for a second.
Yes,
my screen did. I stayed very bland Caucasian, but it's just this idea that the kids are getting really positive stuff out of it. And there was one thing that said it was trying to teach them basic empathy, like, you're a cis straight kid, so this means nothing to you. Why are we even worrying about it? And it was like, just for a moment, like, imagine you actually were gay or bi or trans anywhere on the groups we're talking about, and when you heard the sort of stuff that you see out there said about you, how is that likely to make you feel? And because there was this one section that said, hey, think about how you feel. Think about how you feel. And they took that to, they're making the kids role play being gay. And goes,
yes. Oh, fuck, it made me angry.
They are not telling the kids to practice. They're not telling the boys to practice sucking dick here. It's just, they're literally
and
saying,
because they also, and because the Safe Schools also allows outside groups to be endorsed on their website. So they sort of have a list of resources. So Safe Schools itself is just one thing, but you go onto the Safe Schools website and they're like,
Australia's internet is a wonderful and fantastic thing, and I have lost Eva. I'm hoping she will rejoin us, and she is back.
Hello. I don't know what happened then. I got really angry, and I think my computer went.
Yeah. There was an anger filter on your computer. I don't know. Even getting too upset. Calm down for a bit.
But yeah, now I can't remember what I was saying because it all just went away. Oh yeah, that's right. There's the resources they link to. And so one of the things that Lyle and Corey Bernardi and a few of the Safe School anti-programmers went on about was that Safe Schools was teaching kids how to bind their chests or tuck their penises for, trans girls wanting to tuck or trans boys wanting to bind to make their bodies feel more natural to them and look more natural to them. And Safe Schools doesn't actually do this. There's a couple of websites. There's one called -18, which is brilliant. It is such a good resource for young trans kids. And they have programs or videos or resources on that website that sort of does teach kids how to tuck and bind and makeup tips and shaving tips and all sorts of stuff that trans kids are going to know that they're not necessarily going to find in a trans-friendly environment, and so they've got this website, and because Safe Schools lists that as a resource, they went on this, the aunties went on this massive bender about how Safe Schools was actively teaching kids to alter their bodies. And I'm like, binding and tucking isn't altering your body any more than putting on makeup or Spanx or wearing a corset or changing your hair color or any of that. It's not altering your body in any other way than that. There's no surgery. It just makes these kids feel more comfortable in the body that they're looking at in the mirror. And that this is such a big deal. It saddens me. I'm like, the Amazon rainforest is fucking burning. The world is dying. We're all fucked. And you're worried that a kid wants to know how to strap their chest down so they feel more comfortable looking in the mirror in a shirt. Like, fuck you. Fuck you. The world is there are so many more important things in the world that you should be worrying about. And this whole save the children is, save the cis fucking straight kids, but fuck the rest of them. I don't want to be a part of that sort of ideology. It's like, and there was that thing of, but it's such a small percentage of trans kids. Like, there could be one trans kid in the whole of Australia, and if they feel like killing themselves because of the way that we treat them, then we are doing an injustice to trans kids. It shouldn't matter if there are 1 or 1 million. Each person is valid and needs a reason to be, loved and accepted and all these sort of things. And the fact that these people are making programs so that these kids are feeling accepted, or at least have these resources that they can look at, the fact that there's such an active stance against it makes my blood boil.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I have to give people on the progressive side of things the hard truth occasionally, like whether it's about LBGT issues, abortion, or even how refugees and asylum seekers are treated, and they're going, why are they doing these awful things? And I have to say, the cruelty is the point. These people, it's their ideology, and it's the power of the ideology. Like the argument people say, like, you can prove this with historical data. Making abortion illegal doesn't reduce the incidence of abortion. It just reduces the safety. And so you need to understand, the anti-abortion campaigners want women who seek abortions to die. They want them to face death. And it's just, so trying to appeal to them and saying, you're not saving unborn babies, you're killing women, they are completely okay with that. And it's like anything about stopping kids from committing suicide. No, exactly what you said before. They know they are actively pushing vulnerable kids to high-risk situations because they think those kids are evil and deserve it.
Yeah, and it's really gross when you're always going to have people like that, but when it's backed up by the government and by the people in charge, or by the people with their soapboxes and their platforms, I cannot imagine what it would be like to be, a gay or trans or non-binary kid. It was almost to me, I feel like maybe it was almost better. I mean, it's not, but when we were in school and we just didn't talk about it, I mean, at least it wasn't anyone actively out there trying to destroy you. But I just, I look at, it's really interesting because I also have a good insight into the school system, or in certain ones, because my daughter's 15, she's on year 10, so she's going into senior school next year. So a lot of my friends have kids that age and all that sort of stuff. And the schools are doing well. It's the government that's trying to stop the schools from doing well. The schools are very much, on the ball with LGBTI stuff. Even up here in Queensland, she goes to a local state school up here, and they're very accepting. They had a big post on their Facebook page the other day about trans and non-binary kids and how so it was a post to share from something else, but it was all about everybody's wonderful and everybody's accepted and whatever. And they didn't have to put that on page. And I said to my husband, I wonder the backlash if they've had anyone complain about this post. It's still up on their page, so I'm assuming that it's that they haven't had too much. But it would be really interesting to see. But I know there's a few trans kids at that school, and so I think that's really helped a lot of the kids and the teachers to sort of be a lot more vocal about their activism and their acceptance and their and I don't think they're part of Safe Schools. I don't know if that's actually made it up to Queensland. I think it's a Victorian thing, but I could be wrong, because in a lot of the stuff I do with sex education and stuff, it's very cis focused. So I don't spend a lot of time talking. I talk to young trans people and young gay and lesbian people, but the sex ed is quite cis focused, because that's a lot of my sex education is from my own personal life experience and my own personal knowledge of stuff, and that's very cis focused because I am cis. So yeah. And when I do talk or write about trans issues, I usually will get somebody I know to help me out with it, or reread it at the end to make sure I haven't sort of missed or said the wrong thing, because it's quite a delicate topic, and I don't think that my voice, while my voice is quite well known and quite sort of loud in this area, it's not my place, and I would always defer to somebody who has that lived experience in that area.
Yeah, and same deals. Like it will always express support and correct people on basic bits of science that they haven't understood any biological science since primary school. My favorite is the anti-trans campaigners doing the clip from the old Schwarzenegger film Kindergarten Cop, where the
boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. It's like, yeah, that's a fucking 3-year-old, mate. Like, you're taking your science advice from a 3-year-old.
They go, even a kid knows. And he goes, it's a kid.
And, any 3-year-old with a trans parent will tell you opposite. So it's just a matter of which kid you get saying the thing.
Yeah.
And, that it's, and I don't pull everybody up on the whole, I think that, if we get too run down on semantics, you can miss the larger conversation. But that idea that, like the same thing is, oh, well, it's XY or XX. And I'm like, yeah, you did year 8 science and that was it, because science has actually moved on from XX and XY, and there are a lot of just X, and there's XYY, and there's XX. And, I always, one of the best threads I've ever read on it was my best friend Delaney on Twitter, who it went viral. It was an amazing thread, and she talks a lot about the intersex chromosomes and the way that how intersex is full of different combinations of X's and Y's, and scientifically proven. It's not just a theory. It's not just a idea that somebody's run with. It's literal science. So if you go onto Twitter, you want to read up about it and learn a bit about it, go to Delaney King Rocks with an X, Delaney King Rocks, and I think it's her pinned post, and she's incredible. She's my best friend, and she's an artist, and she's gorgeous, and I love her very, very much, and I will plug her wherever. But yeah, that's a really great scientific based thread on the science of X and Y.
Yeah, we really have to get Delaney on one of these talks, because we've both said on Twitter, yo, Delaney, you should join in. And she says yes, and we haven't got her yet, but we will eventually.
We will.
Because, it's not just that she's incredibly well-versed in the actual real information on that. As you say, she's an artist. She does visual arts. She loves painting miniatures for, like, tabletop gaming. She's a computer artist. She's designed characters.
She's a game developer and game designer. She's done incredible. Like, because I'm not a gamer, it's really tricky for me to say, scroll down her list of achievements and games, because I don't know the names of them, so they don't stick with me. But I know she worked on the Where the Wild Things Are movie, which is just brilliant. And for my birthday, she made me one of the best pictures I've ever got, and I'll find it. It's in a frame in another room, and I want to put it up in here. But it's a mashup in the sort of style of the Terry Froud Goblin sketchbook sketches, and it's a mashup of a Podling from The Dark Crystal and Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor, and it is so good. It is the best. Like, it'll be on her page. She'll have a thing of it. But yeah, she is an incredible artist, and if you ever need artwork done for computer games or miniatures done or anything, she's your girl.
Yes. So we'll really get her on at some point. We've talked her up heaps. Now she has to come on because we've talked her up so much.
She's my
but yes,
BFF. Do it for me. We just have to get her in the same room or get,
Yes.
you know, I mean, because she's incredibly busy as well.
Yes.
And so, yeah, but we'll get her on.
Yeah, but just even simple stuff. Like I was reading the other day, there was a study saying, like, with all the mix of chromosomes and whatnot, there had been a belief that there was only one chromosome type that would result in a fertile woman, and they've since found out that isn't true. And they go, oh, okay, we just learned something new. An unusual chromosome type can be a fertile woman. It's basically turning all that dumb bullshit on its head. So the actual science completely contradicts everything stupid TERFs say. And it's, and even just like, you know, the culture wars. My favorite one was there's this absolute idiot in America. Well, I've got to narrow it down. I just realized that was pretty broad.
Sorry, America.
That was pretty broad. Yep. And I was even like, he's one of, you know, he's an idiot right-wing commentator on YouTube. Nope.
I bet he's white, broad. Yeah.
Yeah, he's white. Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, hang on, let me think. I'm pretty sure I know who you mean.
It's a really, really, really big list of it. And he's actually a conservative Jewish guy. And Ben Shapiro is the one I'm thinking of. He's one of hundreds. But most of them either call themselves atheist or Christian. He's actually Jewish, which is hilarious because he associates with people who hate him because he's Jewish. It was hilarious. He was on like the right-wing website Breitbart, which is full of Nazis. And there were all these private chats and threads that got released how much they hated having this Jewish guy. Now, he quit the site. He said it was because they didn't defend one of their writers who got physically roughed up by Trump people. But I think it's kind of also because he knew everyone actually hated him for being Jewish. But anyway,
weird. It's that kind of lying with dogs and getting fleas and thing. It's a weird sort of alignment. Yeah,
but he's
like we talk about the whole my old podcast I used to do. There's a just a girl that's not particularly wonderful in sex worker circles, and she's known as a bit of a anti-sex worker, even though she's a sex worker. And my co-host used to call her the Uncle Tom of the sex industry, and I adopted that. And now whenever I talk about her, I usually use the pseudonym Uncle Tom, and everybody knows who I'm talking about, including her, which is really funny because if I ever mention it, suddenly there's a rampage going on somewhere else. But yeah, he's a bit Uncle Tom. He's good old Shapiro.
Yeah, well, he's very anti-trans, and his big brain thing is, the XXXY thing, which is first just factually wrong. But then he says you can't have anything apart from these conservative gender role models because of XXXY. That's how you judge if someone's male or female, because he's arguing against gender surgery, and they'll still be XXXY. And he got completely taken apart by ContraPoints, who does great videos on YouTube. But the short version was, Ben, how long have we known about genetics? Even if what you're saying about genetics was right, and it isn't, but if it was, how long have we known about genetics, Ben? 20th century, yeah? How long have Western societies had male and female roles? A lot longer than the 20th century, isn't it, Ben? How did they do it? How the person presented themselves, how the person told you who they were. That's when we went male, female, not genetics, you fucking muppet.
And also, and that's also a very westernized, very white, very narrow. I mean, it's always very westernized and white and narrow view when it comes to right-wing nut jobs espousing their bullshit. Because, like I mentioned earlier, the Native Americans had the two-spirit, many-spirit, the, genderless people. The ancient religions had genderless gods or genderless, I mean, it's this sort of, it's all very patriarchal and controlling. It's like those things you see, these means back in my day, men were men, and like, well, which day? And I've often answered with, I put together a bit of a collage of what day are you talking about, and there's some 12th century French men with their long wigs and their high heels, and then I've got a picture of 1970s glam rock glitter, men, and I was like, what day are you talking about? Even the 80s and the men with their muscle crop tops and their little booty shorts, and I'm like, well,
yes.
This is sort of and recently there's been this whole thing about ballet that I think it must have been a really early, really recent thing, because I've only seen it in the last couple of days. Somebody made some comment about male ballerinas not being masculine or something. Yeah. And so there's been a whole bunch of stuff about have you seen how tight and taut and muscular and strong these men are? But there's also the talk of, why does it have to be the default? Femininity is not wrong or bad or weak. And this idea, I mean, we just talked about the fact that women, feminine, the ultimate feminine power is giving birth. That is pushing something the size of a fucking watermelon out of something the size of a pea. That's fucking powerful, man. That's strong as, So a couple of men in tights on their toes with the most amazing, graceful leg lifts and stretches. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty badass female power, like there's this idea that femininity is weak, and therefore men who express female traits, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean, are somehow weak. I'm like, you fat fuck on your keyboard sitting, male ballerinas. I'd like you get in the ring with a male ballerina, and he would not only pirouette circles around you, he'd knock you the fuck out. Like, it's just not that I am endorsing violence, and not that I think that violence should be used to prove masculinity, but this is that I'm speaking in their language to them. They believe that this sort of weakness of something. And I'm like, I've seen male ballerinas. They are incredibly strong and powerful. So it's just this weird idea of masculine and femininity and what is weak and what is strong. And I'm like, there is nothing stronger than giving birth. And I've done it, so I can come out from a, with a peace point of experience and say, that was something I'm a weak woman. I only ever did that once, and I was not going back to do that again. So I have friends who have had 7 kids naturally, and I'm like, oh, you're amazing. It's just incredible. This idea of weakness in femininity is bullshit.
Yeah. Hey, I want to tie back, because we're coming very close to an hour. I want to tie back to what we're originally talking about, the history of porn. It just occurred to me, in your research, did you end up finding, like, a favorite pornographer from history? Did you find something that was completely new to you that you were very into?
I found one of the things, and I actually wrote, it was actually a whole section I wrote. It's about a painting by a guy called, Edward Menard, I think his name was. It's a painting called Olympia. And if you look at this painting today, it's just a woman, she's lying down on a bed, she's naked, and there's a black slave girl, I think, next to her, passing her some flowers, and there's a black cat on the bed. And this looks like every other painting of a naked woman from that period of time. But it was so controversial that they had policemen guarding it. It almost caused a literal riot in Paris when it was created. And it was basically for a few reasons. And the main reason was that they thought that he'd kind of copied another piece of work, which is a religious artwork of Venus lying back on the bed, and she's being given I think it's a tray of food or jewels or something. And so this was because it looked like to them, because the paint brush strokes were thick, and it's quite a sort of, it's a different kind of style rather than that very fine salon art of France. And so the people, the salon and the art critics of the time basically said that it was depicting a prostitute lying on her bed being given a gift of flowers from a previous client. Because the black cat has its tail raised, it's a sign of the devil. And and it was almost banned. They were going to burn it because this depiction, which is similar to every other piece of art that came out of France at the time, but because of the way that he used his brushstrokes and the fact that she's obviously a sex worker and not a goddess, that was a problem. And the same artist also had controversy with another painting called, I think it's called Luncheon on the Grass, and it's basically a lot of well-dressed gentlemen having a picnic on the grass with a lot of naked women. And because they're obviously not goddesses or nymphs, they're probably prostitutes or sex workers. It was another big controversial piece. So I found that really, I think that was the most interesting thing, was depending on who painted it and how they used their brush, it could be as beautiful religious iconry of Venus or of Aphrodite, or, you know, these beautiful kind of ethereal women, or no, they were women that were, you know, paid to have this ethereal kind of, you know, experience with, and therefore it was obscene. And it just goes to show that, you know, things have not changed. You can, use sex to sell yogurt, but you can't sell sex because, you know, that's gross.
The context of that one's fascinating because he's quite a well-known painter. I'd always confused him with Monet.
It's Manet.
Edward Manet. He's a modernist. He came after the things. But yeah, I mean, that was maybe I'm going too far, but I think that was obvious provocation on his part. He's like, exactly what you were saying. You're allowed to paint goddesses. You're allowed to do that. And he's going, yes, but if I paint an ordinary woman and do it in a style that you're not used to, I'm all up in your face. And it's like, what
and
the
that's
hell?
sort of, you know, one of the things that sort of happened in France as well around the time that photography became a thing, was that if you were depicting naked bodies, whether male or female, for artistic purposes, so that your students could learn the form of painting a female form or a male form, and it was done as an educational tool in that sense, then it was allowed. And so all of this porn started coming out that was depicted in a sort of way that you could, no, it's just like a life model, but it's a photograph of her for students to depict. So people were, you know, the studios in France, when mass producing of photographs went from about 13 studios to about 400 in a year, and they were almost all doing porn. So I found that quite interesting. And they all got away with it, with saying, oh no, it's art.
It is a weird, and that's the never-ending struggle. Like I recently watched, I think it was like a Netflix biopic of Betty Page.
Oh yeah,
the notorious Betty Page. Might have been a cinema released film. It was okay. It wasn't great, but it was this fascinating thing that she got involved in fetish imagery. And there was not even sex depicted. There was not even nudity in a lot of it. But it's like, no, this is some weird stuff here. And they're going, no, this is an artistic exploration of an...
That's kind of one of the things that burlesque does as well. When you look at, you know, burlesque dancers are like, oh, I'm not a stripper, I'm better than that. It's like, no, you're still taking off your clothes for cash. Like, yes, there's a different style and it's a different form, but it's still, I mean, you know, and it's very similar to that sort of way of, oh no, I'm not taking nude photography, I'm making art for students. It's that same, no, it's still porn. It's still, you know, and burlesque performers, a lot of them get very shitty when you bring up the fact that they're, you know, it's just a different form of erotic dance or sexual service or whatever. And I'm sure I'll get a burlesque or two dancer on here getting cross at me for saying that it's basically just a different form of stripping. But, you know, we use pasties and we're lots more classy. And it's not, class has fucking nothing to do with it. Like, if you're, you know, creating erotic imagery for money, then you're doing erotic imagery for money. It doesn't matter if you're doing it full frontal nudity in a Hustler magazine or you're, you know, it's still all porn, and that's basically the conclusion that I came to in this article, is that it's still all porn, and the only way to make sure that it stays the way that it's going in this kind of ethical way that we are getting to is to pay for it and to only seek out ethical pornographers. So do that. Pay for your porn. #.
Yes, yeah. I think last time we had this discussion, that's where we ended up too.
We
It's
would
like,
pay for your porn.
if you want to be ethical, pay for your porn.
Yeah.
And there are independent ethical producers.
Oh, and there are so many and independent ethical providers and these really, yeah, it's like, yeah, you can just click on and jump on for free, but I just think it's not fair. You're getting this. People have worked very hard to create content, and I think the internet age is one of the first times where these providers are getting as exploited in that money sense as they have before, because before they had that, you got paid for your job and then it went to a video store. There might have been distribution, there might have been certain royalty things, but this day and age, once you're paid for it or you put it out there and somebody pirates it or takes it and sticks it on Pornhub, like it's bullshit. I find the providers and the pornographers and the porn stars that you want to see, and then go to their websites and their Twitters and their things and look for what they are selling and it's usually a very small fee as well. And then you can be sure that, you might want to go, oh, Angie White, tits out, Pornhub. Go to Angie White's website and buy her damn porn. Same with any of them. I just use her because she's a well-known big name that people would search a lot for on something like Pornhub for their free content. And she's Australian, and I know her, so I'm going to use her. But as her name,
she's
yeah,
an Australian legend.
She's fucking great. I love Angie. But yeah, find the pornographers and the performers that you like, and go to find their stuff and pay for their stuff, and then they can keep making more excellent content for you.
Yeah, and I'm with you that at the end of the day, when people start trying to make classifications between this is art, this is education, this is porn, it's just a negative and destructive approach to the whole thing. My two favorite stories are from the American judicial system. There's one judge, because of course they have the First Amendment, freedom of expression, and most porn is protected under that. You can't be prosecuted for making porn unless you start crossing certain lines. And it's a First Amendment thing. And when there was one obscenity trial in place, the defense lawyers saying, well, with the First Amendment, how do you define what is obscenity and what's protected speech? And the judge said, I might not be able to define pornography as in obscene pornography, illegal pornography, but I know it when I see it, which is, of course, useless. And there was another judge who supposedly said something along the lines of, where it moves from art to pornography is, if it gives me an erection, it's pornography. And the joke
yeah,
goes,
but some people can get erections off potatoes. So, that's just, I mean, that's a whole subjective thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the joke with this guy went, he passed a lot less negative judgments as he got older. Like, basically, as it got harder for him to get it up, things were less likely to meet his definition of porn. Because he'd look at it and go, nope, I haven't got it up. Can't be porn.
It's really interesting. I studied quite a lot about Larry Flynt in the lead up to writing this piece as well. I mean, I love Larry Flynt. Him personally probably is not a particularly wonderful man, but his contribution to the porn world and what he did for that freedom of expression and that First Amendment right when he went to the Supreme Court with Hustler magazine. It really did pave the way for what we know now as porn and porn consumption. And, I mean, because, you think back to good old Hugh Hefner, what bought some photo of Marilyn Monroe to stick in a centerfold, and she's not naked or anything. Yeah. And that started this insane kind of want for erotic photographs of famous people or not so famous people.
Yeah, I tell you what, I have done a bit of reading on those people, and like Hugh Hefner has a better public image than Larry Flynt or Bob Guccione from Penthouse. But I've done a bit of reading, and Larry Flynt and Bob Guccione are both much, much better humans than Hugh Hefner. Hefner was fucking awful. Hefner was guilty of terrible, terrible, terrible things. And although he, Playboy was softer porn than Penthouse or Hustler, but Hefner himself was a much worse person.
Well, when Penthouse first came out, it was the very first magazine of its kind to show the sort of things that they were kind of showing in Penthouse, but interactive in the sense that the models were looking at the camera and there was full frontal nudity at the camera for the view, whereas in Playboy a lot of it was very kind of it was erotic in the sense, it was like you were a voyeur in a private situation rather than this was performing directly to you, which is what Penthouse did and changed in that sort of way. And then Larry Flynt came out with the next edition, which was sort of, the next step from just eye contact. It was hello, here we are.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw sexual acts depicted in Penthouse, but unless you got a Penthouse Black label, you would never see any kind of penetration or erect penises and things like that. And then you had, Cosmo had their male centerfolds for a while, which was, pretty cool. And then that got sort of shut down. And that was more shut down though, because I think, there were a few reasons, but and obscenity laws were one of them. But women just weren't as interested in looking at naked men as men are at looking at naked women, and that there are exceptions to that rule, and I think that could be, I don't know if that's nature nurture, the way that culture has conditioned women to be, but then when Penthouse Women's Forum came out, which was actually a friend of mine's wife was the first editor of Women's Forum, and that was a direct kind of argument about women being left out of the porn conversation, and that was a lot of that though was the stories and the erotica. There were pictures as well in it, but the erotica was what a lot of women bought that for, which sort of puts into that whole women are mental creatures and women are visual creatures, which is actually not true, but it's what we've been conditioned to believe as humans.
I'll tell you what, a significant bit of my sex education came from 70s Penthouse Forum letters.
Oh, yeah, me too. I love Penthouse Forum.
Now, looking back on that, you find out, well, first, disturbingly, there was a lot more rape happening that the guys involved didn't consider to be rape. But there was a lot more male, gay, and bisex happening than the mainstream would have you believe. There would be these letters from guys who were like, I'm married, I've got kids, and I went on a camping trip with my 3 buds and we just ended up sucking each other's dicks.
Yeah.
And like, wow, really?
I think that was one of the best things about Penthouse, and it's the Penthouse Forum letters really was, as much as they were, everyone's like, oh, that didn't really happen. I've been in situations where I'm like, oh my God, this could be a Penthouse Forum letter. If I was one of those people that wanted to write into Penthouse, I could make, I started my career basically writing a column that was my life as a Penthouse Forum story each week in People magazine. Was an erotic story about some sexcapade that I'd had at work when I was a sex worker. And I had to kind of erotic them up for the audience, which is so funny. I read back over some of them now and I'm like, oh my God, I cannot imagine now sitting down and eroticizing sex work for anybody, because it's like, I'm so over it now. I've been doing it for so long. It's like, it's just a fucking job. Get in, get out, go. I'm much better than that in it. But, it's sort of, and I would be writing these sexy, sexy stories about, all the different things I'd do at work. And now I read over and I'm like, I remember that job. That was a horrible job. Oh, I remember that guy. Oh, he was a wanker, And you would never know it though.
Yeah. Actually, there was an interesting point just raised in the chat about how you can get away with stuff if you make it a documentary. And there was particularly in the 70s, there was a trend for, it got known as Ozploitation. But I've seen this one that was brought up in chat called Australia After Dark. Was made in 1955. It was just like on TV one time, and I thought, this ought to be funny. And it's pretty graphic, and it covers a really diverse range of sexuality. I just had the giggles the whole time because I was going, that's someone's grandma. 1975, these swingers parties and sex workers and bondage.
But also, if you think back to the 1970s, as much as we think, that we were quite loosely, you know, we were a lot more open to sex and sexuality in the 70s. And I think the AIDS scare in the 80s kind of repressed us back a little bit. But you look at things like, say, that TV show, the number 76, number 96.
Number 96 was the
Number 96, an Australian soap opera. And they had, sorry?
There were two on different networks. Number 96, which was a joke because it was 69 backwards. Yeah. And the competitor was called The Box.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I've only ever
the Box was a competitor for number 96.
But they had gay sex. I mean, they didn't depict it, but the guy was you see the clip all the time. I'm a homosexual. He says homosexual because the woman's trying to come onto him, and then oh, okay, you're gay, cool. You know, there was a lot of sex and a lot of loose sort of swinging activities kind of happening in this soap opera. And, you know, we were very much, you know, as the Penthouse, the centerfold, Cosmo centerfolds of naked men, you know, for women were in the 70s. Like, I think we oppressed ourselves back into the box in the 80s. And then the 90s, we kind of, I don't know what happened to us. You know, I fully believe this end of the world 2012 Hadron Collider thing.
We're in an alternate reality now.
We are. I've seen, ever since that weasel got stuck in it back then. I'm like, the weasel in the Hadron Collider changed our realities, and that's the whole Mandela thing, and that's the whole Berenstain Bears and JC Penney's and yada yada. Yeah. I'm inclined to believe it, and I don't care what anyone thinks. If anyone thinks I'm a psycho, good on you. We're living in an alternate reality where Trump is president and the world is burning.
Yeah. I mean, slightly related, I always find it funny with younger generations, Gen Y and Z, basically acting like they're the first people who ever had sex. And
but we were like that. And I remember my dad saying to me once, do you believe you're the first generation to ever smoke pot? Because I'd said something about weed. And, you know, and I remember thinking then, and now I think about it about, you know, my kid and the stuff that she's, you know, you guys didn't invent sex. You didn't invent porn. You didn't invent weed.
Yeah.
We did in the 90s.
Yeah. Let me show you porn from the 1920s. It was just like, you know, but I think you're right. Every generation does it. And it's very funny to see, like, oh yeah, we're getting into BDSM and stuff, and it's like, dude, we were always into. Everyone did. I brought up Betty Page,
and then tell me that you invented BDSM.
Yeah. It's just like, okay, every generation thinks their parents are squares and they're the ones who are doing the hip wild stuff, and your parents thought exactly the same thing, and it's just an endless cycle.
My daughter had a birthday party recently, and they all came all dressed in you know, like flannies and dog boots and old grandpa pants, and I'm like, and my daughter calls it vintage, and I now get why my mum would get so cross at me when I'd call 70s clothes vintage when I was 16. And she'd be like, it's not vintage, it's just the shit in my cupboard. And that's like, and now I'm experiencing that too. It's not, 90s is not vintage. It was 10 years ago. Shut up.
Yep. I remember a cartoon from this like late 80s when there was a bit of a 60s revival, particularly with Paisley clothes. And it was like a young woman wearing a Paisley shirt saying, I got it at Paddington Markets, and an older woman wearing a very similar shirt saying, I got it in 1966. Yeah. These cycles just keep happening.
New again. Yeah.
Look, I think that's a good place to leave it. We have, as usual, covered a fantastically diverse array.
We have, and we've gone way over an hour.
But that's good. Give people a little bit of content, something to talk about, something to think about, something to
we make you laugh, we make you cry, we make you think.
That's our goal, really, isn't it? So,
this should be our motto. We should have that like written across the screen.
Yeah, let's get it on a t-shirt. I like
Let's have a look. I'm just going to see. I'm just looking at the chat now, and I'm just going to see if there's anything that anyone.
I don't think there's anything that we didn't cover already. I'm going to sign off for our podcast for now. I hope you've enjoyed if you're listening to it. Obviously, we've had some people live with us, but if you're listening to it later, I hope you got something out of it. And we will be back again soon. So
next weekend, I'm not working at all next weekend, so I should have some time.
All right, that sounds good. And we hope that you join us as well. But we'll say bye for now. Bye.
Mwah. Bye.
All right, and that's where the podcast recording can go. And so, yes,
Cool.
thank you to everyone who was in the
Ah.
chat. Apart
Oh,
from
I'm
the
all
one,
just getting my
apart
hi.
from the one kid I had to kick out. But that's
I know,
okay.
poor little what's his face. I can't
Fucking
remember his name
turd.
now.
Yeah, well, they're
There's
just
always one though, isn't there? You know, you can't.
often.
Oh
Yeah.
wow! Oh, I was just looking at the the screen because it's all delayed, and I saw myself stand up. I'm like, what? I'm not standing up. What? But it's
Yeah,
all,
no, there's like a 5 to 10 second delay if
yeah.
you look at the pack, which is very disconcerting, quite honestly. But yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us in the chat. We will, like I said, Eva will be back next weekend,
Yes.
and we'll see you soon. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you all later. Bye. Wait,
Bye.
no, that's the end button. I hit the end button.